You're listening to the Save the Marriage podcast. Your marriage can be saved and strengthened if you have the right information. Join Dr. Lee Baucom as he explores ways for you to improve your relationship and your life, starting right now.
Hey, this is Lee Baucom, and this is the Save the Marriage podcast. And this is the podcast that I've designed for you to help you move through the marriage crisis and back to the marriage you want by finding the right steps, the right approach, the way to do that. And you may have noticed this podcast doesn't have all the advertising that other podcasts seem to have on there. I'm not trying to get you to, go find out how to get your best greens or best other thing out there. But I do want to refer you to my program. That is what's behind all of this. It's the Save the Marriage system. And the Save the Marriage system is designed to help you implement what we talk about on this podcast. There are lots of other resources I add to it, but you'll notice there's a lot of what needs to happen that I talk about on the podcast. And then the Save the Marriage system gives you how to do that. And if you're interested, that includes the entire system, including the quick start guide, and even what to do when your spouse is not really on board with that. That's another piece of it, and a bunch of other modules. But I also right now have a couple of things to add onto that because I want you to take action. And one of those is a get started session with one of my coaches. It's about a 15 to 20 minute complimentary session just to make sure that you are on the right path. And I'm going to make an offer to you, and that is for a free week of my VIP virtual coaching program when you buy the system. That's the time that I offer that. So if you come back later and say, hey, I wanted to take you up on that week, no, the time to do that is when you make the purchase of the system. In fact, you have to decline that in order to continue the process. And so let's talk a little bit about, by the way, and how to get that is to go to savethemarriage.com/system. That's savethemarriage.com/system. So what is this about today? Well, this is about the fact that people often seem to get fixated on the wrong point in this process. So let me tell you kind of a little bit of an analogy, I guess, or a comparable. That is when I used to be working with lots of couples who were getting ready to get married. They had to come through my office before they made it to the altar. And one of the things that was interesting is how often they had become so fixated on the event of the wedding that they were having a hard time thinking about the process of the marriage. And so they had this moment, this moment in time, this event that they were focusing on. And they were so focused on that event that I think they were losing track of what was going on behind it all. And what's interesting is I see the same thing happen kind of at the other end of this, when a marriage is in trouble, when a marriage is looking like it might end, and people are once again focused on a moment or an event. And they are not as focused on how they got there. So here's what I mean. Many times there is a spouse going, okay, we're getting divorced, right? Or we need to separate, or I love you, but I'm not in love with you. All of those are these moments along the way, these moments of awareness. And those are the moments when you become aware of just how bad things have gotten, that maybe you had some understanding of. I've talked to a lot of people who are like, well, I didn't think our marriage was perfect, or, I didn't know that this was the next step. And so they have a kind of a peripheral awareness that things are disconnected, that there's pain involved, that there's a lot that's going on, but they aren't bringing into an awareness the fact that the crisis is at a pivot point. And that's what I mean by that moment. The moment is when you become very clear of the crisis and the fact that the crisis is at a pivot point, a pivotal time in your relationship. And so that's the moment. And a lot of times people will talk to me for a long time about everything going around that moment. And I get a moment to say, let's talk about the process. but they want to go back to the moment because it's so hurtful. I didn't know my spouse would do that. They pulled the rug right out from under me is one thing that I hear all the time. Or, this blindsided me. I had no idea. And so this moment of awareness often becomes very seared into people's thought process, so much so that they have a hard time thinking about how to pivot back toward the relationship. They're only aware of the fact that their spouse is looking to a pivot away from the relationship. And that never gets us very far in the process of restoring a relationship. Okay, so there's the moment when you become aware of the crisis. And then there is the event, right? And the event might be that you decide to separate. That's an event. A divorce is an event. And so that event can be marked by just this time period, right? The event itself. It's kind of like the event of getting married often blinded people to what are we going to do after that. And the problem with this orientation towards moments and events is it gets us away from the only place that you can make a difference in your relationship. The only place. The event is the event. The moment of awareness, it's the moment of awareness. It's just this period of time. Where we want to spend our focus, though, is on the process. So I've used that word a number of times. Let's talk about what I mean by that. I'm often looking for how relationships got into trouble, and there is a core reason that marriages get into trouble, and often it has to do not quite with a moment, but with a period of time when people decide to hit the pause button on their marriage. I've used that analogy many times, and people can come back and say, man, I do see that period of time when we hit the pause button. So a couple gets married. They have an event, right? They have this moment of time where they say, oh, we love each other and we want to spend our lives together. And so in that moment of time, they decide to aim towards an event. And the event is to mark their joining together of their relationship. That's the event. And that begins to be such a fixation that they start losing sight of what got them together. Why did you get married is one of the questions I would ask them. Or why do you want to get married? And they would often say, well, we love each other. And my immediate kind of next step is, okay, so then what happens after that event? What happens next? And many times they were just like, well, we'll just continue, right? We love each other. That will carry us through. And it doesn't. And here's why. There is a process that has to happen in transforming your relationship where you go from you, me to you and me. That's the first kind of moment that a couple goes, oh, we're a couple, right? The next moment is when they say we want to join our lives together. And there is a place where at that moment, they could follow a process of becoming not you and me, but we. We are in this together. We're a team. Now, when that happens, then they begin to see their life as our life together. Our joining together of resources, our joining together of having each other's back, of being on each other's teams, of joining together to choose to work through the difficult times, which will come. 100% guaranteed will come for any marriage. There are difficult times when you're trying to pull a life together. There are difficult times if you don't pull your life together. Just as an individual, we're going to face those times. But the question is, in a marriage, can you say, we're going to face that together as a team, right? We're going to step forward as a team. So that's a possible process. But what a lot of couples do instead is they go, okay, now we're married. And now we need to kind of do some other things, whether it's, kind of divide and conquer is what they think. And they forget that the divide and conquer strategy is really about dividing the enemy, not separating yourselves. But that's what they kind of think. Oh, we'll divide and conquer. You handle that area, I'll handle this area, instead of asking, how can we handle our life as a team? Now, that doesn't mean that both people have to sit down and do everything together. That's not what I'm talking about. It's a mindset, right? And that's one of the things that I've often talked about is the way back is about changing that mindset. Okay, so let's go back to that moment where you're like, okay, you know what? I'm going to take care of the kids, or you're going to take care of the kids, or I'm going to go, build these friendships, or you're going to go and build these friendships, or I'm going to go build this career, or you're going to go build this career, or I'm going to go, in these hobbies, you're going to go in these hobbies. And all of these places are moments when when couples say, will get back to us. And unfortunately, they don't even make that often as a kind of a statement. Hey, we'll take care of this part of life and then we'll get back to us. But they think it. And so I've heard we'll get back to us, when after the kids are born, after the kids are in school, after the kids are out of school, after the kids are out of high school, after the kids are out of college, after the grandkids are old, on and on it goes. It's just kind of this rolling, nebulous, we'll get back together then. A lot of couples say, we thought we would do it when we got retired, when we finally retired. We finished our careers. We moved through parenthood, we moved through our careers. Now it's time for us back together again. And they often look at each other and go, who are you? What happened along the way? We diverted onto separate paths. One of the things I used to really kind of look at is kind of the physics of life. Back in the 80s, that was a big deal around spirituality and about reality. And it's no less true today, but we don't talk about it as much because it's kind of become kind of everyday language. And so when we talk about, for instance, chaos theory, I use the idea of originally from science, where chaos theory says that if you start with a system and you have kind of the same starting point, but there are slight deviations in those starting points, the two systems that you're comparing will diverge in very different ways. So let's say we have a couple that are kind of standing together. They say, I do. Yes, we're married, off onto their life. And then they stop checking in with each other to self-correct the process, to stay together as a team. They kind of stop checking in, and chaos theory kind of takes over. And so they don't notice it because they make assumptions about we are seeing things just alike, which was never true anyway. But we assumed we were seeing things just alike, and slowly over time, they build into separate lives. And it happens so often that I refer to that as hitting the pause button. We hit the pause button and thought we would unpause it down the road. Why does that not work? Because you can't pause any relationship. Every relationship survives and thrives because it's given attention, right? Not because it's ignored and left to disconnection. So when you attend to your relationship and you stay in connection, it stays together and you work together. But when you hit the pause button, you're like, we'll just put this relationship into kind of suspended animation. Yeah, we'll check in with each other every now and then. Yeah, we'll cooperate on different things in life, but by and large, we're going to get through this stage of life and then come back together, and then the next stage of life and come back together, and then the next stage of life and come back together. And all along, you're diverging your paths further and further apart until you suddenly stare at each other along a wide gulf and say, who are you and what are we? What has happened to this relationship? What have we become? And that's the point. That's the moment when one or the other suddenly becomes aware that there's a crisis, shortly to be followed by the other person having this dawning realization as they're being told, I love you, I'm not in love with you, this isn't working for me, where I'm not getting what I want. And generally, both people are going, yeah, we're not either one of us getting what we want and what we need, because the connection was cut long ago. It was paused. And when you pause connection, it declines. There is no suspended animation. There is no pause. So they hit the pause button, not realizing it, and not realizing that the pause button is false. It does not work. And so then they come to this event of divorce, of separation, of suddenly there is an affair you have to deal with. There are all these pieces, and they want to point the finger and say, there's the problem. But that is not the problem. The problem was the process, the disconnecting over the years. And part of what often happens is that we have all of these emotions of anger, of hurt, resentment, frustration towards a spouse over the event that you're pointing at, and hurt over the moment of realizing that your spouse is going, this isn't working for me, hurt that something has failed in the relationship. But when that happens, they miss the process that got you there. This is the blame game, right? I'm going to blame my spouse for deciding to separate, for filing for divorce, for having the affair, for all of these things, instead of asking the question, what was the process that we both were involved in that led to the disconnection, that led to those moments, to those events? Now, let me be clear. If your spouse had an affair or you had an affair, I am not saying that you or your spouse are responsible for that affair. The person who didn't have the affair is not responsible for the affair. I cover this in my book on recovering from the affair. If you're interested, you can find that at theaffairbook.com. That's theaffairbook.com. Okay, so I'm not saying that you are responsible for your spouse having had an affair. However, I will say that with just very few exceptions, I don't even want to get into that. I also cover that elsewhere. An affair is a symptom of the underlying disconnection. Separation is a symptom of the underlying disconnection. And so it doesn't help when we get stuck in this blame game of who hit the pause button, who decided that it's too painful to continue, who decided that they love but are not in love with the spouse, and on we go. That doesn't get us anywhere. It's a victimization process when we get into the blame game, rather than stepping into responsibility. Now, many times we have crossed that word up in our language, and so people will say, who's responsible for this mess, right? Which is a way to saying, who can I blame for this mess? But there's another layer of that of asking, if you created this, how can you uncreate it? How can you move to something different? How can you take responsibility? And I love Jack Canfield's use, a colleague of mine, his use of that, where he says responsibility, 2 words, ability to respond. Response ability. Your ability to respond is what makes a difference here, because then you suddenly have some choices, which is why I hope you are listening to this podcast. If you're looking for somebody to bash your spouse for having filed for divorce, for having had an affair, for having separated, for having let you know that they are hurt and they can't go on, that's not my place, because that doesn't help you move forward. It keeps couples stuck in a victim mentality rather than asking, what are our choices from here? So the moment and event is symptomatic of the process. And once you have decided that that is the case, you have the opportunity to make a switch, to change your focus. So the process of rebuilding requires, first of all, to get away from blame, and second, to choose choice, to take on responsibility, to move into that. My model of recovering a marriage has 3 C's. They are connect, change, create. Connect with your spouse, change yourself, create a new path. Okay, so connecting with a spouse, I've talked about in other episodes about how connection happens on 3 different levels, and how you need to begin to work back into that, not by forcing, not by making, not by causing, not by getting your spouse to do it, but by invitation, by bringing into an invitation of connecting again. We invite connection. That's how we do it from the very beginning of any relationship, and that's how you restore a relationship. Second one, change. Change is because I'm not saying this isn't code for Lee going, something is wrong with you. That's not what I believe. I do believe that humans tend to stagnate and stop changing. Therapy for years and years, being a therapist for years and years of being a coach and watching myself, I happen to know that we have to work against getting stuck. And we have to continue to work on changing, of growing, of finding flexibility, of finding new ways of being and becoming as we mature through life. And so you have to take that back on, because it's often gotten to a stuck point. And so making a choice to change yourself to be the best person you can be, so you're changing and showing up differently in the relationship, is an important piece of that. So connect with your spouse, change yourself, and then create a new path. Remember when I talked about the opportunity of being a we, and the symptomology of what I see in broken marriages is they never really stepped into that. And even if they did at moments, they didn't hold on to it. They didn't embrace it. They didn't understand it. And so creating a new path is creating a path to we. Many times people will say, I don't know what path to create. It is to we. It's finding where you are not at that place and moving into it in different ways. So that is the process that you're going to discover by stepping into my system. You can find that system at savethemarriage.com/system. That's savethemarriage.com/system. And remember, join that 1 week free VIP virtual coaching, and also sign up for that Get Started session as long as it's available. If it's not available, it will not be there for you to sign up with. And I apologize. We do have limited space, both with my staff and in VIP. But if it's there, do take advantage. That's your chance to do that. Remember, visit us at savethemarriage.com/system. That's savethemarriage.com/system. And this is Lee Baucom wishing you the best as you work to save your marriage.
You've been listening to Save the Marriage podcast. For more information and help, please visit us at savethemarriage.com.